In viewing a portrait, one's eyes are quickly drawn to the head. If the verdict is thumbs down at that point, what the artist has accomplished in the rest of the painting does not really matter. Possibly, it is this artistic fact of life that has made so many portraitists critical of their own painting of heads. Edouard Manet, the Impressionist master, was known for repainting a head many times. His contemporary Degas also changed his mind frequently while painting heads. We know this because Degas' last layers of paint, now more than 100 years old, are becoming translucent and revealing his earlier painting indecisions. In 1884, in a Paris Salon exhibition, America's most famous portraitist, John Singer Sargent, caused a sensation. The head of his beautiful subject was in profile. That, and possibly other aspects of his painting, violated tradition. One critic used words like detestable, boring, curious, and monstrous. Probably that trying experience contributed to Sargent's later conduct. He often ruthlessly scraped down a head he had painted and started over when others would have deemed him finished. As Margaret Holland Sargent demonstrates today, keep in mind the importance of painting the head. Once you have mastered the head, you are well on the way to being a successful portraitist.
You know, being a successful portrait artist doesn't necessarily mean selling a lot of paintings. You could be a success if you make a family member happy, a grandparent, by painting the grandchild, or a sister or brother. Yes, being a success means making yourself happy. Today I'll be demonstrating painting the head in oil, and you'll see the whole process from start to finish. First I'll do the sketch and get the proportions, then we'll mix the colors for the background and the clothing, and finally the flesh tone mixtures just for our particular subject, and then I'll apply them so that we get the feeling of roundness and depth to the painting. Here is our basic palette. We have the original 14 hued colors plus 8 mixed flesh tones, which I'll get to later. But starting with the reds, we have 4: alizarin crimson, red deep, red medium, red light, orange deep, orange, yellow deep, yellow medium, and yellow light. These top shades are all cadmium barium colors. The orange deep is a little unusual in that most manufacturers manufacture an orange that looks like this. To get the orange deep, you go to Grumbacher, they make an orange cadmium that's this deep, and Liquitex has a vivid red orange that's basically that color. The other hued colors, basic hued colors, are ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, and cerulean blue. The 2 greens, phthalo and viridian green. We have a series of 8 neutrals, beginning with ivory black, the darkest, and running through 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 grays, ending with permalba white, the lightest. These shades of gray are lined up in value with the hued colors above them. Red deep and number 3 have the same value. Number 4 and red medium, the same. Number 5 is matched with red light. Number 6 with orange deep. And 7 is the same value as both orange and yellow deep. And 8 matches yellow medium. Fortunately, Liquitex makes a series of grays with exactly these value numbers, which saves us a lot of mixing time. Here you see the flesh tones that you can mix yourself just by using the colors on the palette. Shadow number 3 is the same value as neutral or gray number 3. Shadow 4 matches gray 4, and so forth, up to 6.5, which matches 7, and 7.5, which is closest to 8, as well as flesh number 8. There are 3 flesh tones in the light range, 2 flesh tones in the half tone range, and your 3 basic shadows. Sometimes you have to paint at night or in a room that doesn't have good light, so I've arranged a setup here with a 150 watt parabolic reflector spotlight on my subject, and on the canvas and on my palette I use a 150 watt floodlight. Over both of these lights I use a daylight blue filter, which you can buy in most photo supply stores. This converts the tungsten light, which has lots of reds and yellows in it, to daylight, giving you a more natural look. Now let's take a look at the pose. You must place your light properly to bring out the best features of your subject. Good general lighting is to place the light at one side so that you get a shadow pattern coming down the side of the face here, and there's a small triangle of light from the shadow cast by the nose. Then you want to place the shoulders, not a square straight on, but generally rotate it around a little bit. Check that, and if that's the angle you like, rotate the subject back a little more. Turn to your right a little bit more, all the way around. Now that I like. I like the placement of the light and the way the neckline comes into the shirt. So let's use that one. For my sketch, I just use a little bit of neutral paint and warm it up with some orange deep, and a bristle brush, about a 6, filbert. You want to leave a little room at the top. Don't crowd the top. Just make a placement there where you want the hair to start, and about where you want the chin to end, and neck. If you're uncertain about this, you can go to the art supply and buy a pair of calipers. These I used, and I measured my subject's head. It came out to be about 9 inches, which is about what we want there. But you can use that if you're unsure. You want to go life size when you're painting a head. So in painting a head, we'll place the head pretty much centered. And we're generally painting life size. See, the base of the chin, the line of the chin, and the cheeks. The eyes come down about in this position. Pretty high forehead, and hair starts about there. Turn your head toward me just a little more. There we go. Okay. Ears. The head is pretty squared on, so the eyes are going to be about there, and the nose will come down about not quite center. Mouth in this position. Cleft in the chin follows the line. There's a sort of dividing line here, and that cleft of the chin comes in just about here. The neck itself is a column supporting the head, and the other side of the neck comes about where that ear lobe ends. Have some the hair, eyes. a little bit more toward me. Eyebrows. Slope of the shoulders. He's a nice relaxed pose here. You want to try to get people to relax so that they don't have stiff shoulders. I keep moving my eye around and judging proportions in relation to other parts of the head. For instance, to the mouth. So if you've established the mouth as being about here and the eyes as being here, then the nose comes in about this position. Of course, each person will be slightly different, but look for those various landmarks, and so form triangles that seem right to you. And the little shadow under the lip there, and the cleft, the little shadow there, here, here. Keep your eye continually roaming around so that you get the relationship between the features. And just brushing in the very quickly. We don't want to spend too much time on the sketch and get so involved in detail that we're afraid to establish the masses when we come time to paint. This is all the shadow side, so I'll try to find where that shadow comes in the head. He has a rather narrow forehead, and I see the shadow is coming about here in the nose area. It comes down, that's the shadow, and then the cast shadow of the nose is here. There's a halftone area right in there, and shadow under that lip, and the shadow from the side comes around here, crosses down from the cheek about that position. Scrub in those darks. Keep the shadow sides very simple and unified. Make a stronger statement. Nice wide cheekbones. Good strong jawline there. If you want to go in and change something, you can just take a little cloth or tissue and dip it in your turpentine or paint remover. a good idea to give your model a break about every 20 minutes. Quite often they don't feel the fatigue at first, and so they'll say, no, they're fine, but they'll last longer if they're given that break. So I try to remember. You'll be going over all these lines later when we mass in the clothing, but each time you put down a statement, it helps you learn a little bit about the subject. All right, about this point, I think we can leave the sketch, but I'll give you one secret. As you're sketching, if you squint your eyes way down so that you eliminate a lot of the light, and you see the big masses, you can get your proportions a lot easier. So let's go to mixing the background colors. That background is about 5 value, but I'm picking up my number 4 neutral because I plan to add a little yellow medium, and I know that the yellow medium is going to bring it up to about the right value. Mix that together. That's a very soft, neutral green drape. Need a little more yellow. I think that'll do what I want. Then the shadow that's cast by the subject is about a number 3 gray. That's your darkest neutral. And I think we'll drop up a value and go to the yellow deep. Keep it warm. Add more of that later. Now let's mix the variations for the light side. We'll take 3 gobs of that color aside and mix a little yellow. Let's see, the light is coming from the left, so we start with the yellow medium, and the next would get some yellow deep. The third one would get a little bit of orange. And we'll mix those together. We still have our basic color, but those variations will give us the feeling of light passing across that background. We call this a series of the same color. You have the same basic color, and then just adding to it so that it forms a nice series from one end to the other. The general rule when massing in an area is to work from the back forward and mass in the largest area, and of course we know that's going to be the background, so I'm taking some of the shadow color with my large number 18 bristle, and we'll quickly lay that in. Don't worry about going over edges. You want to stay nice and loose. I'm using a copal painting medium with the paint. Makes it flow nicely, and it leaves a nice finish when it's dry, a nice shiny finish. I'm painting with the variation that has the orange in it, the one that's farthest from the light source here. I'll blend that in with my shadow. keep the brush strokes going different directions because it seems to add a nice texture there. Here's my variation with yellow deep. Run that right over into the hair because we want to go overlap the areas. That way you can automatically get a nice soft edge. Now I'm painting with the variation that has the most yellow in because it's the area of the drape closest to the light source. I'm working rapidly today so you can see the whole process. But if you wanted to take the time, you could work in other variations, get life to your painting. Just stay within that value so that you don't make the background too busy. I'm painting over the edges again, going down into the area where there's less light, so I have added a little bit of darker color. Black is good to mix in with your basic background color. As you get further from the light, it gets less intense. Restate some of the shadow side. Now I think we're ready to mix the clothing colors. For the shirt, in the general dark area, I'm using a number 4 neutral. I'll put a touch of cadmium red light in that because it's a warm gray. It's a tiny plaid, and that part of it has a reddish stripe, so the cadmium red should give me the overall look of that shirt in the dark areas. Now, for the light side, we'll go up to light number 6 with a touch of orange deep, which should hopefully give us the same effect in the light. We're not going to be painting plaid at the moment. It's such a tiny plaid that I think it's far better just to do a general color. Okay, let's mask that in and see how close we came. For the shadow side, doesn't seem to be too much shadow. It comes here under the collar, along collar here, and on this crease of the arm, and one that comes up so. Put that brush aside and take a fresh one, this time a number 12 filbert bristle brush. At this point, I will see how close we came on the light. That's pretty good. Since we're using neutrals, why, I can take a little of the light, dip it in my dark for a halftone, and it works quite well. Going back there, and that's shadow. I'll get my shadow brush back out. This part over the shoulder, it's a sort of a halftone area. It's getting a little reflected light from the background, so I'll dip my brush in one of the greens that's right behind his shoulder and add that to the gray, and it'll help give a transition back there. And I'll do the same thing down this part of the sleeve with the darker gray and the darker green. This part of the collar's getting more light, so we'll lay that in with the lightest of the lights. There's also a double roll of fabric here that seems to be the lightest. And the rest is a mix. I'm going to use the light mixed with a little of the dark and some of my copal medium. As it goes away from the eye and the light, it gets grayer, so I'm using almost pure neutral over there to get that sleeve to turn away from me. I want a feeling of roundness there. It's rather important to get the clothing in the background masked in before you mix the flesh tones for the skin, because they really do affect the colors that you use when you mix your flesh tones, the reflections and so forth. And it's a very good idea to mix extra amounts of clothing and background color. You can add a touch to your flesh tones as you paint and get that look of reflected light. Let me find this. That needs to be a little bit lighter. It's sort of getting a highlight on the collar, so I'm mixing just a little formaldehyde in with my basic light for the collar. As the clothing is going away from the light, I'm just adding a drop of cadmium red light into my basic light. It's picking up over here the same way it did in the background. Just a bit, don't go overboard. You want it almost to be imperceptible. It's there and yet not overpowering at all. As we go around that corner of the sleeve away from light, I'm adding more dark and more red to my mixture. There we go. Cover all these little bits. Restate my shadow area there. Using a slightly smaller brush here just to get this little shadow under the collar. This style of painting is called alla prima, and you try to put the paint down the same color as you want to have on there at the end, if it's possible. We don't do a lot of overpainting. Let me check that with my model. See where we need a few accents. I think we have about enough to start working on the flesh tones. Here's a chart showing you how to mix the basic flesh tones, starting with shadow number 3, the darkest value, through shadow 4, 5, 2 halftones, 1 6, 1 6.5, and 3 flesh tones, 6.5, 2.5, and 8. Now, you have these colors on your palette, and you just drop down. The first one, shadow number 3, takes 6 parts of gray number 3, combined with 1 part of red light and 1 part of orange deep, making you a total of 8 parts. The shadow number 4 takes 6 parts of gray number 4, 1 part of cadmium red light, 2 orange deep, making a total of 9, and on through the process until you've mixed all 8 of your flesh tones. Now, this is just a basic formula. We don't want you to use them directly. You must balance them with each individual sitter and make sure that you add the colors that will be perfect for their flesh tones. I have 3 shadow mixtures for flesh tones, 2 halftones, and 3 mixtures for the general light flesh tones. I'm going to go through them one by one and give you the ratios of what I'm using and tell you exactly what paints are in each. I'll start with flesh number 8. Flesh tone value number 8 is my lightest light, and the ratio is 6 parts of neutral gray number 8 mixed with 1/2 part orange deep. There's my flesh number 8 mixture. What I call flesh number 7.5 is the next darkest, has 6 parts of neutral gray number 8, 1/4 part of cadmium red light, and 1/2 part of cadmium orange deep. Now, I'll remove those to my mixing area. Looks just about right. So, we'll return that after I clean that off a little. For the third flesh tone, slightly darker, that's a 6.5 value. I use 6 parts of the neutral gray number 8, 1 part orange deep, and 1 part cadmium red light. You see we're using the basic gray number 8, and in the first step we added orange. The second step we kept orange and added red. In the third step we simply repeated that same formula and added more red. So you're making a series of flesh tones, the base being neutral number 8. That step looks just about right. So we'll put it back in the area next to step 2. And we'll go on to the halftone mixture. This is the very difficult area between shadow and light. And since it's delicate, I've mixed 2, a cool halftone and a warm halftone. The cool halftone has 3 parts of gray number 6 and 3 parts of gray number 7, the neutral. To that, I've added 1 part yellow deep. The yellow in the mixture combines with the black in the gray to make a greenish look, which is wonderful as a foil for your skin tones. And it's still very nice and neutral. That looks great. We'll just put that up in our flesh tone chart and go on to the next halftone, which is a warm halftone. This one is made with 6 parts of gray number 6 and 1 part cadmium red light and 1 part yellow deep. That looks just about right for our warmer halftone, which is part of the flesh going into the shadow side. Let me clean this off. The lightest shadow mixture is a value 5 and 2 gray number 5, 4 parts of gray number 5. I've added 1 part of cadmium red light and 2 parts of cadmium orange deep. That looks perfect. So we'll just put that mixture on our palette. For shadow number 4, I use 6 parts of gray number 4, 1 part cadmium red light, and 2 parts cadmium orange deep. Shadow number 4. Shadow number 3, our darkest shadow, has 6 parts of gray number 3, 1 part of cadmium red light, and 1 part of cadmium orange deep. Shadow number 3. Here we have our series of flesh tones. Before applying the flesh tones, I'm going to just mass in the hair. So that we can determine the proper value. I've used a black with some cadmium red light mixed in for this shadow mixture, and for the hair on the light side I've used about a gray number 4 with some cadmium red light and a little cadmium orange deep. As it goes further into the light, we can just add a drop of white and keep it colorful with some cadmium yellow or cadmium orange deep. His hair is dark brown and it has highlights of red. The last thing generally you want to paint on a portrait is the flesh tones. It's frustrating because you want to get to that face right away, I know. For the very top of the hair, where it's in shadow, it's getting a reflected light from the backdrop, so I've just included some of that backdrop color right in my mixture with the mixture of the black and cadmium red. Let's see, there's a little accent place in here. All right, we'll set that brush aside. And the first area of the flesh tone that should be put in is the shadow side, number 4. That looks like the general shadow. These flesh tones, by the way, are really just a general mix and should be changed for each sitter. You modify them according to the subject's own coloring. It happens that these turned out to be just about right for my subject today. So I'll be modifying them occasionally, but basically they look all right. Try to find all the areas that are in shadow. Turn back toward me. There you go. Thank you. We'll go back in there later and soften those edges. The ear is in shadow. The neck comes out a little. All right. Now again, working from dark toward light, we'll be going from the shadow into the light side, and we're working with those very, very tricky halftone areas. So I'll start with my halftone 6, which is the warmer halftone, up here in the forehead. That area is a little colorful where it catches the light. Actually, maybe a little bit of sunburn there. It's the halftone area just over the nose. Mixed a little halftone with shadow to get that very difficult transition on the chin. Turn your head toward me a little. Sometimes it's a good idea to just paint over the whites of the eye and go in later and restate those, because the tendency is to get the whites too white anyway, so working that way helps. Now this halftone comes a little further across forehead. I'm going to work it up into the hair. Turn toward me a little more. Thank you. All right, I'll put my halftone brush down for a minute, pick up another number 8 filbert, and start with, I like to start with the forehead. It seems the largest area of the lighted areas of the face, and that deepest flesh tone seems appropriate right across here. Actually, I'm just going to brush that in completely. And as I get to the edge, I'll mix a little bit of the corresponding gray number 7 to make that seem to just turn away from the eye. There's a plane of the skull that goes away right here, and the gray will help you get that look very nicely. The nose is that same, turn toward me a little more, same pinkish flesh tone. We can use that same pinkish flesh down in the neck where it has that ruddy look, adding a little cadmium red light. In the nose, where it's quite colorful. Find places to use that. Keep your head there. Thank you. All right, for the side of the neck near the light, we know it's that same value of red, but it's a little grayer because it's going away again. We want to turn it, so I'm using the same flesh, number 6.5, mixed with a little of the gray in the same value range. Pick up a little darker gray for that part of this Adam's apple. I'm going to go to my flesh 7.5, that's the middle value, which is about the right value for this whole area of the light side of the face. There are more colorful parts, but we'll turn your head back, please. Thank you. We'll add those in. To indicate that in men they have this area where their beard grows and it's just a little bit grayer, so the solution is to reach over and get your neutral, in this case number 6. Underneath lip, it has sort of a more yellowish color. So I just put a little yellow medium in with my basic mixture, or rather orange, I'm sorry. We're trying to get this canvas covered now. The objective should be to get it, all the canvas covered in a half an hour, if you possibly can. And then work on refining it later. This little triangular part of the Adam's apple is catching some light, so we'll use that middle light grayed down a bit. It gets rather colorful toward the bottom, so I'll add a little red light. Cadmium red light is an indispensable color when you're doing portraits. There's just no way getting by without it. I also use a lot of the cadmium orange deep in my paintings of people. I'm going to switch to a little smaller brush for that mouth area. The upper lip is really almost in shadow. So I'll take a value, the shadow 5, and mix it with a little of the cadmium red light and see how that works for my mouth. It seems to do the trick all right. Nice full mouth. bottom lip is catching the light pretty strongly, but it is even redder than the the rest of the face. So we'll add a little cadmium red light in with my darkest flesh, which I call number 6.5. And as it goes into the shadow side, it picks up in color. Try a little red medium here. Mixing it with some shadow colors, it really goes into the shadow side of that lip. Soften these here and work them together. Feeling that shadow should go a little bit left here. Right about there. Those restate. So we'll have a nostril here. Taking my dark shadow and finding landmarks. I believe that mixture of the shadows, the two lighter shadows, is just about right for the eyebrows, so we'll try that for now. Go over the edges. Pick up the hair color. Okay, got most of the canvas covered now, and so we'll look around for places where we can swim things together, little accent places, and find our Now I'm stepping back, examining. I know we need to give more height to the hair here. Comes up, round, into the shadow. A nice wave that occurs right about there. Here is one area that should be kept very loose. That shadow behind around the ear back here is colorful, so I added a little cadmium red light to my basic shadow, and I'll lay that in. Quite dark. I'm using my gray number 3 with a little black for the accent behind there. Use some black and alizarin for this spot behind the ear that's so dark. Coming here. My subject's eyes are gray, blue, green. So we'll use a little viridian and some cobalt with one of our grays, about a number 4, and we'll just see. Now, very carefully put those eyes in where they should go. Eyes have to match up. Okay, and under the eye, there's some halftone
Shaping that around. And it goes into shadow on that side. The lightest shadow on this side. And over the eye. And here the lid comes. It's a shadow. Here, look. Thank you. Put those in relation to the upper lid. Let's build in the light area. Find some of the warmer spots. Generally through this area of the face we find the most color, and that's where your cadmium red light is really useful. I mix it in with a little of the flesh tone. Add it right in here. There's a area right below the nose, and just before it goes into that part of the upper lip that has the where the hair grows. That's very colorful. This area down here, I go down to orange deep. It seems to be that yellow ochre look right in here. A little sort of a pinkish gray. Nope, a little more cadmium red light in that. Just the top of the chin. Let's examine those lips and see if we can get a shape that's a little bit better. Very full lips. This side has a darker, colorful area just where it goes into the shadow. And I'm using red deep and a little alizarin. Don't want to draw a line straight across the mouth. Keep it broken. Let's find the nostrils now. They're a combination of alizarin and your gray number 3. Let's try that. I don't like to go to pure black and alizarin for nostrils, but we may have to because this is quite a dark spot. We don't want it to attract too much attention. That seems to be all right. I'll mix the gray number 4 with my alizarin for the other nostril. Comes about in here. We have an accent area in the shadow side of the nose, and I'll use my darkest shadow mixture for that. See if that will work. It looks just about right. That's my shadow number 3. There's another shadow that's very dark that occurs right up here in the eye. Okay. I'll bring this shadow color in a little bit further and just blend it into that halftone. move the eye in just a little. There's only one white of the eye that really is getting the light, and it's sort of a glancing. Now the white of the eye is really more flesh colored than it is white. So I'm using my gray number 7 with a little bit of the corresponding flesh tone. And we'll see how that works. Just a touch there. That's about as much white. Now the other eyes, the lid seems to be shading them almost to the point where they're not, there's very little change, but will indicate a slight grayish color there. I've used my neutral number 5 in some flesh tone. And I'll take some halftone in 5 and see if that'll work for that, the white of that eye. Now I'm going to model in the light side a little more. I haven't used too much of my lightest flesh tone, so I'll pick that up on my brush and find spots. There's a place on the forehead that's getting light right in here. And correspondingly, the skull comes out at this point. Add a little white, lighter flesh. And on this cheekbone, we'll go with that lighter. We want that skull to show right through the skin there. We want to model this. And it looks a little pasty in the shadow side, and so I'm going to go in with some of the halftone and add more color, a little more orange deep, a little more cadmium red light. Yes, that helps a lot. Keep that pasty look away. It's very colorful around the nose area here. Using a little of the flesh number 6.5 with some gray to get that chin to recede. As it goes into shadow, it's quite colorful up in here. It's interesting, it has a very warm transition into shadow and then a very cool, depending on the plane and the position of the face. This is a very warm area, this is a very warm area, and this is a very cool. So you use your cool halftone mixed with the shadow to get this transition. It has the greenish look. Okay, now I'm going to find the local color on the tip of the nose. Seems to be this darkest flesh tone. It's rather a squarish look with a little bit of the cadmium red light as it goes into the shadow side. And at the top of that square, we have a highlight. And the highest highlights on the portrait usually occur at the tip of the nose. And for this, I've mixed a little of the gray number 8 with my flesh number 8. I'll place it right about there. See, that works pretty well. Now we look for other spots on the lips. There are some highlights. I'm going to mix cadmium red light, which is about the local color of the lip, with some of my lighter flesh. Put it right about there. I think the reason that doesn't seem light enough is because the surrounding areas aren't dark enough. So I'm going to go in and restate this shadow area underneath the lip a bit. Skip around. I have a tendency to not stay in one spot too long. If you do, you're liable to get too detailed in the beginning and find yourself working in an area that isn't quite in the right place. So you have to start all over and you've wasted a lot of time. We see that there's a little bit of half tone right in here. The nose is getting some turning by adding a little of the gray. That point, and there's a colorful part that needs some cadmium red light right under the nose here. Let's concentrate on getting those eyes to match. Dark blue ultramarine with some black. Look right. Okay, right. Pupils right here. And the other is right about here. Pupils. That lid is casting a shadow on the eye, so we can use a slightly lighter shade of the eye color, or rather use a little black with the eye color to give that shadow effect there. It's very rare that you'd want to paint eyelashes, if at all. So they're indicated just in value change. I mixed a little bit of red deep in with the shadow color for this center portion of the eye, which is very colorful. And this eye, try to match and make the eyes even. Get a lid over this. Don't make a continual line with the fold over the eye. That's a trap that will make your painting look very amateurish. There is a highlight over the eye itself on the lid. I'm using my flesh 7.5, which is the middle flesh tone, just in a very gentle stroke, and the same on the other lid, a little bit deeper. Let's go to flesh 6.5 for that, right there. where a light passes through the colorful part of the iris of the eye, the most color will be found on the side of the eye away from the light, because it enters into the iris and it is reflected back right in this area here. So in the side of the eye, away from the light source, mix the brightest color for the eye and place that in a little half moon right there. I see I have obliterated my pupil. That was the one in black with a little ultramarine, so I'll put it back in there. Around the iris of most eyes, there's a little rim that's just a little bit darker than the iris itself, and so I generally add a little darker color toward the outside, blend that up into the shadow that's falling onto the iris from the lid. We have some warm reflected light coming in from this area, hitting the chin. So I'm going to use my light shadow, number 5, mixed with some orange deep, because generally reflected light is warmer than the object reflecting it. And orange deep is a pretty good mixture for something reflected on from a fairly neutral surface. Then down here below the chin, it's getting a warmer reflected light because it's picking up some of the flesh tones. So I'll go down to my red light, mix that in with a little of the shadow mixture, and be very careful, find just where that hits underneath the chin. So that gives you the shape of the bone. And that occurs just on the outside of the neck, a little bit there. I'm going to blend in a little bit in certain places to try to unify the painting. I don't want to get it too bland, because I want the brush strokes to show. I think that's nice to have a fresh look. By graying this cheek here as it goes away from the light, you really get the feeling of form and the skull. You almost show the bones under painting. Let's get a better shape to the mouth again. It's much fuller than I have it over in the shadow side. It just seems to swim away into that lovely halftone. All right, I'm going to model this a little bit to give it that full look that he has. Used my cadmium red medium for that. There's almost an alizarin accent in the corner of the mouth here. Some hair on the chest with a little of my shadow color. Now we're adding a few highlights to the hair where the light touches them, where they're closest to the light. A little bit thinner in the face than I have him, so it's easy to cut in. also helps keep the edges soft. Some reflected light on the end of the nose. I'll use the orange deep in my lightest shadow right in there. That helps give shape. And there's a warm, reflected dark. I'll use a cadmium with my red right along in here. Mouth, just a touch. Try once more to get the highlight on this cheek on the left. See if my problem evidently is that I didn't go dark enough in the surrounding areas, so I'll rectify that with a little darker halftone there and a little more color in the cheek underneath. That way my highlight gives the shape that I want. Get this side of the neck to recede a little more by graying it down. Finding highlights now. Create the feeling of form. There's a lovely turning under that we catch at the corner of the mouth here. That's in halftone. Goes almost into shadow as it goes into the lip area. Same thing's happening here. Get that with some shadow. And darkest shadow with a little alizarin right in the corner.
Since you last saw the painting, I took a break, I stood back, and I examined it very critically. And I noticed that the eyes didn't match up exactly the way I'd have liked, and I also noticed that there was a little color lacking in the painting. Now let me show you the corrections that I made. I worked on the eyes. I found that I wasn't happy with the placement, so I moved the left eye up just a fraction, and I put a shadow under this eye so that it didn't look quite so starey. Also, I added color to the cheek here where it goes into the shadow. That's a place where you do get most of the color in the portrait. Now, I'm going to add the highlights in the iris of the eye. And they're the part of the eye that's closest to the light. Since the light is striking right about here, we add one highlight there. Now, to place the second highlight in the same position on the other eye. And being careful not to use pure white, because pure white will give you a glassy look. This is gray number 7.